There are trials without criminals, testimonies not from lawyers, but from the very people we call family. Today, you'll hear a strange story where my own wife and even my mother-in-law brought the entire family to a courtroom, not to sue over money, not to fight over land, but because of something seemingly small, yet powerful enough to divide an entire home. This is a true story. A courtroom with no papers, no judge, yet more painful than any verdict ever declared. If you've ever believed that family is the safest place in the world, then stay until the very end of this story. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our deep, real-life stories, and join us in finding peace, even through the storms that once felt impossible to overcome. One dinner, 3 ice cubes. Saturday evening. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. The sun had just dipped behind the row of houses across the street, leaving a faint orange hue over the familiar dining table, the same one where my family had gathered every weekend for years. My wife, Lynn, bustled out of the kitchen carrying a steaming bowl of sour snakehead fish soup. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Tam, had already set out the braised pork and garlic stir-fried morning glory, her signature dishes, seasoned with the same boldness as her personality. I sat with my head bent over my phone, scrolling mindlessly through the news, barely registering the aroma of dinner, a habit I had unknowingly repeated hundreds of times over the past few months. Mrs. Tam pulled out a chair and sat down, holding a glass of water with 3 ice cubes. The clink of ice echoed sharply through the quiet air. That sound, like a warning bell. No one spoke as we began eating, just the clatter of chopsticks and the gentle hum of the air conditioner. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was tension. I had just picked up a piece of meat when my mother-in-law suddenly placed her glass firmly on the table. The 3 ice cubes rattled, letting out a clack that cut through the air like glass. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, not angry, but filled with disappointment. "You don't even know who the elders in this house are anymore, do you?" I froze. Chopsticks still in hand, my body stiffened. That sentence wasn't just a rebuke. It was a quiet slash, deep, sharp, and wordlessly painful. I looked toward my wife, but Lynn avoided my gaze. She kept her head down, picking at vegetables, as if dodging something, or perhaps expecting it all along. I tried to stay calm, to find some logic in this confrontation. "Mom, is something wrong?" Mrs. Tam kept staring, but now her eyes weren't on me. They seemed to bore into the silent gap between the 3 of us. "What's wrong? What's wrong is that because of you, this family is going to court." I was stunned. "Court? What did she mean?" This wasn't a divorce. There was no property dispute. I owed no one. Nothing serious had happened, at least not to my knowledge. I let out a nervous laugh. "Mom, are you joking?" "What court?" But she didn't laugh. Neither did Lynn. No one moved. The whole room felt frozen in time. Mrs. Tam lifted her glass, raising it toward the light. The 3 ice cubes were clouded now, slowly melting. "Do you know what these 3 ice cubes represent?" I shook my head. "1 is me, the elder, trying to hold this family together. 2 is Lynn, your wife, your daughter, exhausted by your silence. And 3 is you, cold, rigid, and unmoved by anything at all." I wanted to argue, wanted to say I still loved this family, that I worked hard, brought money home, cared for our child. But the words got stuck in my throat, because deep down, I knew something had gone off course a long time ago. I just never stopped long enough to see it. "Tomorrow," she continued, We'll have a trial. No lawyers, no judge, just truth. She stood up, leaving her meal untouched. My wife quietly cleared the dishes, without a word, without a glance, and I sat there, alone at the table, with a glass of melting ice and a dinner growing cold. I stared at the last remaining ice cube, shrinking, clear, like a quiet wake-up call. I never imagined that one day, my own family would have to go to court. The courtroom, without paperwork. I used to think court was something distant, a place for disputes, lawsuits, punishments. I never imagined that one day I would sit in a courtroom created not by law, but by my wife and mother-in-law, and not in some courthouse. But right inside the home I had lived in for nearly a decade. Sunday morning. The wind was still. Sunlight streamed into the living room patiently, just like the way I was pulled from sleep, not by an alarm, but by my wife's calm voice. "Come downstairs. Mom's waiting." I walked down the stairs, my heart heavy as stone. In the living room, everything had already been set up. Not a dining table, not the usual sofa, but a small square table with 3 chairs placed opposite one another. In the center, a notebook and a pen. Mrs. Tam, my mother-in-law, sat in the middle, a cup of steaming tea before her. My wife, Lynn, sat to the right, holding an old notebook, her face unusually calm. I sat on the left, trying to lighten the mood with a nervous smile. "Mom, is this real? I thought last night you were just speaking out of frustration." She didn't answer right away. She looked at me, eyes no longer harsh, but deliberate, as if reading from a verdict she had silently prepared for months. "This is a courtroom without a sentence, but you're here to listen, not to argue." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to chill me to the bone. Lynn placed the notebook on the table and opened it. The pages weren't filled with long journal entries, but short notes, numbered by date. She began reading. "March 4th. You came home from work, saw Mom putting food away in the kitchen. Didn't say a word. Went straight upstairs and locked the door. March 19th. I had a fever. Texted you at 2 a.m. No reply. In the morning you said, 'I slept through it.' March 28th. Mom slipped outside. You just stood there and said, 'Be more careful next time.' I froze. Each sentence struck like a gavel, not loud, but heavy. You still go to work. You still bring money home. But do you even know what you've been bringing into this house lately? Coldness, distance, and the feeling that no one matters anymore." I opened my mouth to speak, but Mrs. Tam raised her hand. "No excuses. In court, the defendant doesn't speak unless permitted." I let out a bitter laugh. So I was the defendant, in my own home, with the woman who once held my hand through every hardship, with the mother who once defended me against every whisper from relatives. "I know life is hard," she said. "I don't expect you to be perfect. But have you ever asked Lynn how she feels today? Ever noticed if I still have the strength to climb 3 steps? A family doesn't need lawyers, but it needs attention, presence, not just the shadow of a man scrolling through his phone every night." I lowered my head. No words left to speak. No, "I'm sorry" strong enough to shatter the silence that now wrapped around the 3 of us. And then, Mrs. Tam did something I never expected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table. "This is my summons, handwritten, no court stamp. But if you hadn't shown up here today, this would have turned into a real divorce petition. And the one writing it wouldn't be me. It would be Lynn. I looked at my wife. Lynn didn't cry. She simply looked at me, the way one might look at a stranger they had tried too long to hold on to. In her eyes, I saw exhaustion, love, but also the beginning of letting go. And for the first time in my life, I understood there are courtrooms that need no laws, but they can still end a family with nothing more than silence, the old mirror, and faded memories. No one said another word after my mother-in-law placed the envelope on the table. The air in the room thickened. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the soft spin of the ceiling fan above, and the uneven beat of my own heart. I lowered my head, eyes fixed on the tiled floor, as if searching for an escape beneath my chair. But there was none. No one moved. No one touched the now lukewarm tea. My mother-in-law sat in silence. Lynn still stared straight ahead, not with anger, not with sadness, but with something far more distant. Emptiness. "Do you remember this mirror?" my mother-in-law suddenly asked, then stood up. She walked into the bedroom and returned a few minutes later with an old wooden-framed mirror, its paint chipped, its edges faded. It was the mirror that once stood on the dressing table back when Lynn and I first got married, back when we lived in this house, before we moved out. "You used to look into this mirror every morning before work," she said, placing it on the table. "Straightening your tie, fixing your hair, then turning to Lynn and asking, 'Do I look handsome?' I let out a small, sad laugh, a mix of embarrassment and regret. Now the mirror reflected my face, more gaunt, colder, and unfamiliar. "Look into it," she continued softly, "not to see how much you've aged, but to see who you've forgotten." I lifted my gaze, truly looking at my wife for the first time in months. Lynn, the woman I once loved so deeply, the one who cried when I wrote her a handwritten letter that summer, the one who swallowed her pride to defend me when I had nothing, the one who held my hand on our old motorbike, drenched in sweat, but still smiling. And now, she sat across from me, separated by an invisible wall, a distance I, her husband, had built day by day with my silence, my nods in place of "I love you," and those dinners eaten without once looking up from my phone. "You're no longer the man I married," Lynn said quietly. "You're still here, but you're no longer present." I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I don't expect grand gestures anymore," she added. "Just don't be invisible in your own home." A gentle breeze drifted through the window, rustling the paper inside the envelope. That paper, like a silent reminder, everything could end with just a single nod. I turned to my mother-in-law. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I don't even know where to begin anymore." She looked at me, then pointed to the mirror. "Start here. Look at the person in the mirror and ask yourself, what do you want to do with this family from now on?" I looked again, and for the first time in a long time, I saw confusion in my own eyes, not out of fear of losing them, but because I finally realized I had almost already lost them. And strangely, within that fear, there was a flicker of light, a desire to make things right, a fragile hope that maybe it's not too late to start over. Lynn quietly slipped her notebook into her bag and walked into the kitchen. My mother-in-law remained seated, calmly pouring more tea into her cup. No one declared the court session over, because I knew the verdict hadn't been given, but I had just made my first appeal. After the trial, after that strange morning trial, The house fell into an odd silence. No verdict was declared. No one offered forgiveness. But somehow, it felt like everyone was waiting to see what I would do next. There were no more harsh words, no more disappointed glances. Only one thing remained, suspended in the air: silence and expectation. I retreated to my room. The door clicked shut behind me, but in my mind, dozens of other doors flung wide open. The words from earlier still echoed, "Inde, you're no longer present in your own home. You don't have to be perfect, just present. You still live here, but you've become invisible." I unlocked my phone. The screen lit up with a dozen work messages, but I didn't open a single one. Instead, I opened the photo gallery. I scrolled back to the beginning: wedding photos, our honeymoon, Lynn's radiant smile when I gave her a tiny bouquet bought from a street vendor. Then the photo of our first child being born. I was holding her, eyes brimming with tears. And the closer I scrolled to the present, the fewer the smiles became. Recent photos mostly featured our daughter, or Lynn with her mom. Me? I had disappeared. Not because I was pushed out, but because I had slowly faded away. For real. I started with the smallest things that night. For the first time in a long while, I stepped into the kitchen. My mother-in-law looked at me in surprise. I didn't explain. I just said gently, "Let me cook today." Dinner wasn't anything special. A pot of mustard greens soup, some fried eggs, and braised fish. The soup was bland, the eggs a bit burnt, and the fish slightly too salty. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the three of us sat at the table in an atmosphere. That felt lighter. No one complimented the food. But Mom passed me a piece of fish. Lynn quietly poured me water. And my daughter, little Mitt, squealed, "Daddy cooked this?" "It's yummy." I chuckled. It felt like a pardon, a simple sentence from a child. Yet it softened the whole kitchen. It began with a word. Late that night, Lynn was folding laundry in the bedroom. I stood by the door, hesitant. "Lynn," I called gently. She paused but didn't turn around. I'm not good at romantic words anymore, but I've realized something. No response. "I still love you, but I forgot how to show it." Still silence. But I noticed her hand had stopped moving. A small shirt had slipped to the floor. "I'm sorry," I said. No tears, no embrace. But for the first time in months, I saw her shoulders slightly tremble. Change comes from quiet acts. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I set the table, brewed coffee for Mom, sliced bread for our daughter. She came out surprised. "You're up early?" I smiled. "I'm trying out a new version of myself. Not perfect, but I hope you'll like him." She laughed. For the first time, laughter echoed in a house that had long been filled only with sighs. A warm and cold afternoon. A week later, I took 2 days off work. We went on a short picnic outside the city. No fancy hotel, no grand restaurant, just a grassy field, a few homemade dishes, and a blanket under the open sky. Lynn lay with her head on my lap, eyes closed. Our daughter ran around with her grandma. I looked up at the sky, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. Lynn whispered, "Are you forcing yourself to do all this?" I shook my head. "No. I'm learning again, how to love the right way." She smiled without saying a word, but she gently squeezed my hand. A letter from Mom. That night, I found a letter on my pillow. It was written in my mother-in-law's familiar, rounded handwriting. "Dear son-in-law, I never hated you. I know it's not easy for men to express their emotions, but remember, women don't need extravagance. They just need you to truly be there. Every mother hopes her daughter will be loved like in the beginning, not with grand gestures, but with presence and a simple, "Are you okay? Thank you for listening. Thank you for changing, not for me, but for yourself and the family you chose." That trial didn't deliver a verdict. But today I'll declare, you're acquitted if you keep living as the man Lynn once chose. Mom. I folded the letter and sat still for a long time. I had never felt so light inside. What's unsaid is often the most true. That night, Lynn reached for my hand as we lay in bed. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one asked, "Do you forgive me?" Because there was no need anymore. I had learned, some trials don't need verdicts. Some sentences aren't declared with a gavel. And some forgiveness comes only when you're brave enough to face yourself. Families don't fall apart over big things. They break when small things are forgotten for too long. And if you still can, learn how to love again. Start with the smallest acts. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come through miracles, but through a meal, a cup of water, a gentle look, and 3 ice cubes that have already melted.